a very warm welcome to another Action for Happiness event. Happy New Year. This is our first event of 2022, and it's just fantastic to see thousands of you joining us again live to share in this lovely community experience. And I'm particularly excited to welcome Professor Richard Davidson, who's joining us as special guest this evening. Richie, lovely to see you again.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark, and thank you for all you're doing.
I think the last time we were together was the event with His Holiness in London back in 2005, which seems a long time ago now. But as always, we've been following your fantastic work. I'm sure many in the audience will be familiar with the great work that you do. But you are, of course, Professor of Psychology and Psychiatry, founder and director of the Centre for Healthy Minds. And you've been doing leading work on the neuroscience of happiness and well-being for many years. And it's fantastic to have you with us. Just to let everyone know who's joining us today, we will be having a conversation together covering a wide range of topics to do with the theme of today's event, well-being skills. And I'm happy to say that Richie will be sharing with us some practical things that we can try out during our time together. And there'll also be time for you to ask questions yourself. So please do use the Q&A function. And we have an ability for you to vote up your favorite questions as well. So we won't get to all of them, but Richie's very kindly agreed to answer as many of your questions as we can fit in. So without further ado, Richie, maybe you could start by saying a little bit about your background and experience and the sort of work you've been doing that contributes to this theme.
Certainly, happy to do that. I'm a neuroscientist by training, and I began my career with a really simple question. Why is it that some people are more vulnerable to life's challenges and others more resilient? And in the early part of my career, I focused a lot on the adversity side of the equation. I studied the brain mechanisms that conferred vulnerability to anxiety and depression and stress. And then my life changed quite dramatically in 1992 when I first met His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And the Dalai Lama challenged me on that day in 1992, and he said very innocently, why can't you use the same tools of modern neuroscience that you've been using to study anxiety and depression and fear and stress, and study kindness, study compassion, study happiness? And it was a wake-up call for me, and I didn't have a very good answer for him on that day, other than that it's hard. But you know, when we first began to study anxiety, that was hard too. And I think most scientists would agree that the field has made some progress. And so I made a commitment to His Holiness the Dalai Lama on that day that I was going to begin to orient more toward that. And then a few years later, I saw him again, and he was more direct. And he said, I want you to take the practices from our traditions, turn them into a form that are more secular, that anyone would feel comfortable practicing, investigate them with the tools of modern science. And if you find them to be valuable, disseminate them widely. And that is really why I'm on the planet today, and the reason I'm here, and the reason we do the work that we do.
What a wonderful journey, and again, great validation of the importance of this work. And it strikes me that here we are in what remains quite difficult times for many people around the world. All kinds of challenges, both socially and around us in society, and also, of course, in the challenges of our everyday lives, whatever they may be. And yet it feels to me what you bring is a message of hope in many ways, Richie, from the work that you do. And some of that seems to me to link back to what I've heard you talking about with the plasticity of our brains. Can you say a bit more about why we might have some hope in this area?
Absolutely. I think this is really an important message. Our brains are built to change in response to experience and in response to training. Scientists have given the label neuroplasticity to describe this. Our brains are constantly being shaped, wittingly or unwittingly. And most of the time, our brains are being shaped unwittingly. Most of the time, we are unaware of the forces around us that are shaping our brains. And we certainly have very little control of those forces. And so the one thing we do have control over is our own mind. And so what we know from now quite a bit of scientific research, really hard-nosed scientific evidence, is that when we cultivate healthy habits of mind, it actually changes our brain. And it changes our brain in ways that support the enduring qualities of well-being. That's a kind of amazing fact. And it really does, I think, give us hope that we're not stuck where we are. We're all facing lots of challenges. It is indeed objectively a difficult time for the vast majority of people on the planet today, but we can actually improve our circumstances, at least to some extent, by simple mental exercises. And one of the important messages that I'd like to leave with you all today is that it doesn't take much to get this going. You don't have to be a meditator doing thousands of hours of practice. A few minutes a day make a really important difference.
That's really inspiring to hear, and it also very much chimes with the ethos of Action for Happiness, where we're trying to encourage people all around the world to take small actions every day, because together these things really do add up. I wondered if we could maybe actually begin with a little practical example. I know you've got some work you've been doing around appreciation. I'd love you, maybe if you could share a bit more about that with the community.
Yes, absolutely. So just to back up a little, our work that we're doing these days is informed by a framework for understanding the plasticity of well-being. It's a scientifically based framework, and it has 4 pillars, key pillars of well-being. One of these pillars we call connection, and connection is about qualities that are important for healthy social relationships. And one of those qualities, which is really so accessible, is appreciation. And we often take this for granted, and yet spending just a few minutes each day intentionally cultivating appreciation can be an elixir for the soul. It really can help tremendously in changing the quality, the demeanor of interaction. So let me give you a specific example. One thing that we can do is, if we are going into an important meeting, we can bring the individuals that we're going to be meeting with into our mind and into our heart, and simply notice something positive about them and appreciate the positive qualities. We can notice or recollect something that they have done to be helpful to the organization in which you might be working, or it could be a family member, a helpful act that one of the family members did to contribute to the overall well-being of the family, whatever it might be. But just simply recollecting this positive quality can be so incredibly important. And one of the things that I do, I try to do this several times a day, and we were sharing about this earlier. Every human being eats. We all have to eat to live, and we need food on the table. And there are many, many people who contribute to us being able to eat a meal. There are farmers who might grow vegetables. There are delivery people. There are people in groceries that might be selling the food. There might be individuals who contributed to making our utensils. So many people contribute. And of course, the person who cooks, spending just 30 seconds before we take a bite and appreciating, even if we don't know who these people are, but appreciating that all of these people have contributed in a very helpful way to enabling us to eat and to live. This is something that's so simple, and we can pair it with this activity of daily living, and through that means it can become a regular habit.
Thank you, Richard. I love both the idea of expressing that appreciation, but also the idea of linking it to habit, something we might explore a bit later on in more detail. But can we maybe try this out with the community right now? How can we invite people to bring some appreciation? Is it maybe to bring to mind someone they're grateful to? How would you suggest we do this now?
Well, I'll be happy to lead us in a formal practice, maybe really short, maybe 1 or 2 minutes, if that would be good.
Yeah, that would be great. Or yes, that sounds perfect. Let's do that.
Okay. So let's all begin by simply closing our eyes, because we're all in front of screens, and it can be helpful to simply close our eyes. If that's uncomfortable, it's fine to keep the eyes open and simply softly gazing downward. And let's start by bringing awareness into our bodies and simply settling the mind and the body for just a few moments. And now let's bring someone into our mind and our heart who has been helpful to us during this time of the pandemic. It could be a family member, it might be a healthcare provider, it might be a teacher, it might be a person who works in your local grocery store, whoever it might be. Bring one person into your mind and your heart who's been very helpful to you during this challenging time. And let's reflect on how they have been helpful and allow this sense of appreciation for who they are and for what they have done to emerge in our awareness. And maybe even reflecting on what we might say to this person the next time we see them to express our appreciation in words. So let's open our eyes now and re-engage and see if we can allow this quality, that whatever quality may have emerged, to continue and permeate the rest of our conversation.
Thank you. That was really really thought-provoking and moving for me, actually. I'd love to invite the community, who I know always like to contribute as well in these events. Maybe if you'd like to share just very briefly who it was that you brought to mind and maybe what it was you were grateful for, feel free to share that in the chat and we'll maybe see a few examples. So someone said focus was my wife, who's made me laugh, my husband, a neighbor, my daughter, an eye doctor, my best friend, my mum, a work colleague, delivery drivers, my PhD supervisor, my boss, childminder, yoga teacher, boyfriend, postman, my dog, and there were so many hundreds flying past. Cat I see as well. It's hard to see so many, but what a lovely sense of appreciation I'm getting from the chat there. Are you seeing that, Richie?
Yes, I am. It's wonderful. I love the diversity.
Thank you, folks, for sharing that. It's nice to have that sense of seeing the good around us at a time when it's often easier to focus on what's wrong. You mentioned these 4 pillars that are part of your work, and we talked about this appreciation being perhaps part of that connection, that social aspect. What would you like to say a bit more about some of the other pillars?
Sure. So the first pillar we call awareness, and awareness is not typically part of schemes of well-being. And yet we think of this as foundational. And the reason we do is because when we are distracted, it exacts a toll on our happiness and well-being. There's a very famous scientific paper that was published about a decade ago. And the title of the paper was "A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind." When we are distracted, it is really toxic. And research shows that the average adult spends 47% of her or his waking life not paying attention to what they're doing. And I have the conviction that we can do better. And when we're not paying attention to what we're doing, we're less happy. So awareness is a big piece. I've already talked a little bit about connection. Other qualities associated with connection besides appreciation include kindness and compassion and gratitude. All of those are part of that constellation. And again, these are qualities that we know can be strengthened with practice. The third pillar of well-being we call insight. And insight is about a curiosity-driven investigation of this narrative about ourselves that we all carry around. Everyone has a narrative about who they are, and this is what human minds do. It's perfectly normal to have a narrative. And one of the key elements of well-being is not so much changing the narrative, but it is changing our relationship to the narrative. The narrative literally filters our reality. It defines what we attend to, how we perceive the world. And if we can have insight into the fact that this narrative is operating in the way that it does, it's enormously liberating in freeing us from being completely constrained by the narrative. And so changing our relationship to the narrative is really important. And finally,
Richie, before we go on to the final pillar, I think that's so insightful. You're talking about the insight there. And one thing we've observed consistently in this work with Action for Happiness, perhaps with an expectation that we might feel that part of our mission would be to sort of cultivate more kindness towards others and how important that compassion is. What we're so often almost shocked to see is how unkind so many of us are to ourselves. That narrative, that sort of story we have about ourselves can be incredibly destructive and toxic, and maybe it's playing out in our heads and we're not aware that maybe others are experiencing that as well. I was really shocked when I first worked with Kristen Neff to discover that the way I would speak to a loved one and the way I would speak to myself was really different, that I had this sort of really harsh way of speaking to myself. I wondered if there's anything you could offer us around shifting our narrative in our heads if it's one that's unhelpful.
Yeah, I think you are raising such an important issue, Mark. I think the first step is really accepting our narrative, and part of accepting the narrative is not being harsh on ourselves. It is what it is, and if we can cultivate some acceptance of it and change our relationship to it, the narrative itself will begin to change on its own. And so in our view, it's important not to expect people to sort of fight with their mind. That typically doesn't work so well. And so by accepting the narrative, we can approach ourselves in a much more gentle way. Rather than beating ourselves up for the narrative, we can just accept it for what it is, which is really a bunch of thoughts. And when we can see it as a bunch of thoughts, we won't get so upset at ourselves for it because it's just thoughts. In cognitive therapy, this is called decentering. And it's a very important skill that is one of the critical pathways in cultivating well-being.
Would it be true to say that sometimes when we're trying to push away the difficult thoughts and emotions, we in fact actually almost give them more power, and yet when we perhaps accept them and notice them for what they are, some of that sort of hold over us calms down a bit? Is that a fair observation?
Absolutely. And it's the classic example of the instruction to not think about a white elephant in the next 30 seconds, do everything you can, but think about anything else, but don't think about a white elephant. And it has the same flavor.
Mm. Sorry, I interrupted you. You were about to go on to your fourth pillar.
Yeah. So the fourth pillar is purpose, and purpose is about identifying our sense of direction in life, and particularly clarifying the values that are associated with that. And it's not so much about finding something more purposeful to do, but rather how can we find meaning and purpose in that which we are already doing, including in seemingly pedestrian kinds of activities that we all have to do on a regular basis. So can washing the dishes or cleaning your house or taking out the garbage all be part of your sense of purpose? And there are simple practices to connect what we do to our larger sense of purpose, so that more and more of what we do, and literally eventually embracing everything we do as part of our sense of purpose.
Well, I think this is really helpful, because often when you think about this idea of cultivating meaning and purpose in life, it sounds very daunting and very large in scope. And so how would somebody who is, feeling a bit purposeless, or dealing with a job that they didn't find very meaningful, how could we, even in those situations, how can we cultivate a little sense of that purpose you're talking about?
Well, so the example you give is a really good and helpful one. Take a person who feels that his or her job is not very meaningful and is feeling quite purposeless. We can have a person ask themselves, well, why am I working? Well, a person might say, well, I need to earn some money. Well, why do you need to earn money? Well, I need to support my family. Well, why do you need to support your family? Well, they're important to me. I love them. So very quickly we can connect whatever we're doing to some larger effort that goes beyond ourselves, some larger purpose. And it doesn't take many of these questions to very quickly identify something really meaningful. One of the things that we found during COVID, we were discussing earlier, one of the large research efforts that we've done is with public school teachers here in the United States. These are individuals who are really stressed, and particularly during the time when they had to teach virtually, many of these individuals had their own young children at home, and it was a very stressful time. And one of the things that they reported is they completely were disconnected from their sense of purpose. They all chose to become teachers because of their passion for kids and for launching them on their life, and those were the core motivations for their choice of profession in the first place. And one of the things that we found from the teachers with this training in well-being is that they said that they connected to their purpose in becoming teachers for the first time since the pandemic began, reconnected with it. And it gave them a sense of vitality to engage that they hadn't had before.
So, Richie, you've walked us through those pillars of awareness, that sort of foundational skill of sort of mindfulness, the connection, and we practiced a bit of appreciation, the insight, and thinking about the narratives, and now the purpose, and sort of seeing how what we do matters, even at a tiny scale. And you've already reminded us that small actions can make a big difference. That's really empowering. But we know that it's hard to change our habits. People set New Year's resolutions and have very often failed in the middle of January to live up to that. How can we use the science of habit formation and behavior to not just try these things as a one-off, but actually make them something that lasts?
Yeah, it's a crucial question, and thank you for asking it. I think that there are several things to say. One is it's really important when we begin this journey to begin very modestly with really small steps, and to choose One of the things we do, for example, if a person expresses an interest in beginning meditation, rather than having a goal of 45 minutes a day, which almost no one is able to follow through with initially, what we say to a person is, please, you pick an amount of time each day that you think you can make an unswerving commitment to do every single day. And do it for 30 days, even if it's just 1 minute. 1 minute is perfectly fine. And one of the things that I remind people is, I'm sure that every single person who is attending this webinar brushes their teeth every day. Virtually every person on the planet brushes their teeth. This is not part of our genome. We've all learned to do this. This is something that is important for our personal physical hygiene. And I think most people attending this webinar would also agree that their minds are even more important than their teeth. And yet, many of us don't even spend the amount of time we spend brushing our teeth, nurturing our mind. And so if we can make a commitment to spend even the short amount of time that we spend brushing our teeth, and you can do this while you're brushing your teeth, so you don't even have to take extra time. And this is really what it takes, is just to begin very, very modestly, but to do it regularly. And I think the regularity is important. So what we say to a person is, pick an amount of time that you feel you can make a commitment to, and do it for 30 days consecutively. Even if it's just for 1 minute, and even if it's during when you're brushing your teeth. And piggybacking it onto an activity of daily living is very helpful, because we do all brush our teeth every day. We know we do. So if we pair it with that, we're more likely to follow through.
Yes, I find that pairing really helpful. And you gave the example earlier of linking it to eating, which we do multiple times a day. And I have a practice that I link to eating. I have one that I link to when I get into bed at night, about being grateful and so on. But the brushing the teeth thing is fantastic. If we could give the same priority to mental health as we do to dental health, then the world would be a happier place.
Exactly. And the world would really be different if we spent even that short a time, if everyone did that.
So in a moment, I'd love us to move on to the great questions that are coming up from the audience, but I feel it would be remiss of us not to talk specifically about challenging situations, because there are people for whom life is not easy right now, or indeed at any point in time. They may be dealing with loss, they may be dealing with illness, they might be dealing with severe mental health challenges. What have we learned from your work about the ways in which we can cultivate perhaps more resilience in those difficult situations?
Yeah, resilience, we believe, is an outcome of all 4 of the pillars of well-being. So there's not any unique pillar that is specifically tied to resilience, but there's actually good, hard-nosed scientific research to suggest that each one of the pillars can help to improve resilience. And from a scientific perspective, one way we can think about resilience is that resilience is the rapidity with which you recover from adversity. So if you recover quickly, you are more resilient. And it turns out that that will contribute to your well-being. And so one of the things that we've learned is, again, any one of these 4 pillars can help to promote resilience. And which of the 4 pillars are most important for a given person at any given point in her or his life is something that we still don't definitively know from a scientific perspective. That's one of the really important unanswered and practical questions in this area of research. But what I would encourage people to do, even in the most challenging of circumstances, is to explore on their own these simple practices that can be helpful in cultivating resilience and in navigating these really challenging times. And we know, and we've done some scientific research. In fact, we've just published a paper with teenage girls in the country of Colombia who have been horrifically abused, and their adverse childhood experiences are 5 and above on the ACE scales. It's very, very challenged, all from very low income backgrounds. And we did an intensive intervention that was provided, of course, freely to these kids, and found, some dramatic benefit. And so the point of me bringing this up is simply to underscore the fact that even in populations that are really dramatically challenged with very significant adversity of many different types, there is change that can happen.
Yes, and it's really empowering to hear that. And I know you have a Healthy Minds program, and I believe you have an app as well. Is that right? That have some of these sort of tools and skills that people can learn. Would you like to say a little bit more about that?
Yes, thank you again for asking. It's called the Healthy Minds program, and it is an app that is totally freely available. There's absolutely no paywall. It is completely free, and it is we can make it freely available through the generosity of donors and foundations that contribute to the nonprofit that we established to create this app. And you can download it from wherever you get apps. It's available on both Apple, iOS, and Android devices. And the New York Times just had a review of the best meditation apps in 2021, and they named 3, and I'm super happy to tell you that ours was one of the 3, despite the fact that we've put literally $0 into advertising. So, and the fact that it's free allows me, without any conflict of interest, to advertise it, because I'm not paid a penny from this. And so I encourage you to please explore it. And if you find that it's valuable, that will make us happy.
What a lovely gift to the world, Richie. We'll make sure we include links back to that and some of your other great work in the follow-up email. Now, I'd love to come to the questions, but before we do that, you did talk about awareness, this foundation skill of mindfulness, and we had a little taste of it with that awareness exercise. But I wondered if I might invite you just to help us experience maybe another minute or so of mindful awareness together in whatever way feels most natural to you.
Sure, happy to do that. So let's again find an upright posture. And the reason we like to sit in an upright posture is really to be awake, but not too tight, not too loose, but feeling ourselves grounded. And again, please close our eyes if that's comfortable for you. And if not, you can simply gaze downward. And let's bring our awareness into our bodies and take 1 or 2 deep breaths. And the invitation here is not to change anything, not to fix anything, but simply to shift from a mode of doing to a mode of being. And simply notice whatever is coming up for you in your body. You might notice the sensations at your feet that may be touching the floor, or your shoulders if you've been sitting watching a computer screen for a long time. And the sensations may be unpleasant, they may be pleasant, they may be neutral. It doesn't matter. And this is an opportunity to use the body as an anchor for our awareness. And it's also an opportunity to cultivate a really important aspect of awareness. And that aspect is to know that we are aware. Now, that may seem strange to some of you, but I'm sure that many of us have had the experience of, for example, reading a book where we might be reading each word on a page and going along from page to page. And after a few moments, we realize we have no idea what we've just read. That's an example of not knowing that we are aware. And the moment we recognize that, it is a moment of what scientists call meta-awareness. So as we are sitting here, bringing awareness to the body, if your mind begins to wander and you notice that your mind has wandered, that's a beautiful moment. It's a moment of meta-awareness, and we can simply bring our minds gently back to the present moment. Another element which is important is to recognize that calming our mind and opening our hearts is beneficial not only for ourselves, but can be beneficial for all of those that we touch directly or indirectly. So let's also spend a moment or two simply reflecting on this and see if we can find within ourselves this altruistic motive for cultivating mindfulness. And finally, as we re-engage and open our eyes, let's see if we can take whatever insight, whatever benefit we may have gleaned from this very short period of practice. And let's spend a moment reflecting on how we can bring this out into the world to be of benefit not only to ourselves, but to all the others that we connect with as well. So with that, let's all open our eyes and re-engage, and thank you all for practicing together.
Thank you, Richie. I love that feeling of there being thousands of people doing that all together, all around the world. I think we normally have people from 50 different countries. So that was very special. And I'd love to invite you all quickly in the community, if you would like to just share one or two words about what came to your awareness in that exercise. We're talking about awareness, and let's just see some of the things that came into people's minds. We're seeing a lot of thanks for you, but also stillness, love, and peace. The shift from doing to being, calmness, common humanity, appreciation, beautiful, active hope, kept drifting off, neck pain, bliss, gratitude, relief, expansiveness, appreciation, acceptance, time to slow down. So, a mixture of very, very positive emotions, but also just awareness of how things are, even if that involves pain and difficulty. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing that. It's really, again, very moving to see that, that real range of human experience that we are all dealing with right now. Let's come to these questions, which has been fantastic to learn from you, but I'd love to respond to some things people are asking. So John has said, what simple steps can a person take to improve their anxiety?
Well, so thank you for asking that. Anxiety is often about the future. We typically are anxious about impending events, threats that we perceive in the future. Sometimes we're anxious about things that may have happened in the past, but they typically remind us of things that may occur in the future. And one of the best ways of decreasing anxiety is to learn to live more in the present moment. Um, and if you find that your mind is filled with anxious thoughts, you can simply become aware of the thoughts as thoughts and see them as thoughts rather than whatever it is that those thoughts might represent. So this requires practice, though. It won't come instantaneously. And please don't be frustrated if it doesn't change just like that, because it typically won't. But it's just gradual. Work with the mind more and more every day, small times, small steps, and gradually things will change. So this is what the science teaches us.
Got two related questions, which I think I'm going to bring together here. Shaney has asked, how can we respond to support a loved one with anxiety? And Julio has asked, Professor, how can we help people from our family who are dealing with depression to develop more well-being? So I guess both coming back to that sense that you cultivated for us at the end of that exercise about bringing a sense of compassion for others. How can we help our others around us develop these well-being skills?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that the simple answer is, although it's not so simple, is that the thing that we can do that I think is most helpful is to cultivate those qualities in ourselves. And then to be with the person in question and embody those qualities. So it's not telling them what to do, it's simply being, not doing, but being fully present, caring, kind, and really, one of the people that I've been fortunate enough to get to know quite well over the last few years is a person who serves as the Chief Public Health Officer in the United States today. The title is the Surgeon General of the United States. His name is Vivek Murthy, and he talks about the epic struggle between fear and love. And so what I would say is that the most important thing to do with an anxious family member is love them, just unconditionally. And that can be enormously helpful.
I love that shift from fear to love. I think that's incredibly powerful, and it certainly has been something I've tried to do with family members dealing with anxiety. But I also hear, what's behind the question, which is it's really hard to support people around us, and actually, we can't change others. We can only ever really change our response to them and the way in which we help them to feel. Susan's asked, can natural solutions like exercise, meditation, and nutrition and so on replace antidepressive medication when you're struggling with a clinical mental health challenge like depression?
Well, that's an important question. And I am not someone who is anti-medication. I believe that in certain cases, the judicious use of antidepressant medication can be helpful. But I also believe that it is overprescribed in the West. And I was shown data not too long ago of the amount of money that our local public school system spends on antidepressant medication for the teachers. It's crazy. And I'm convinced that we can actually improve the situation and decrease the use of medication at the same time. So it's not that I'm anti-medication, but I do think it's overprescribed. And I think that some, at least, of the challenges that people are experiencing can be addressed without pharmacological intervention. And the kinds of strategies that we're talking about here have many fewer side effects compared to antidepressant medication. And they're free.
Yes. And again, encourage people to check out the resources of yours that we will share following this event for practical examples of how to do that beyond the ones we've talked about today. Anam has asked or said, I work with university students to help promote well-being. Can you suggest anything I can do to help them improve their well-being?
Yeah, this is a huge issue of great importance. We're doing a lot of work with university students today. And we have organized an initiative in the US called the Student Flourishing Initiative that is bringing together a consortium of universities that is interested in exactly this question. We are using a version of our app, the Healthy Minds program, with university students very successfully, both here in the US as well as we have a big project going on now collaboratively in Mexico with one of the largest private universities in Mexico. And we've translated part of the Healthy Minds program into Spanish, and we are disseminating it there with great success. We also have designed a course for university students called the Art and Science of Human Flourishing. And you can go on our website and learn more about the details of that course. But that's another strategy. And this is a regular college course that students receive credit for. And it has intellectual content, but it also has practices. They have a laboratory where they learn to cultivate their own well-being. And we're actually doing scientific research to look at the impact of this. And we actually have a publication that's coming out soon on the impact of this course as we follow the kids through college. And it has great benefit in helping them navigate the challenges that they confront as college students. So please check out the materials on our website. There are a lot of resources that we provide, and we would love to see this disseminated more widely.
Well, it's a really important question because there are so many people in a student context who are struggling, but I know you've also done work around children of much younger ages as well, and how there are skills around mindfulness and so on that can be really life-changing. So I think it's, what we're really talking about here are skills for life that we'd love to see in our curriculums, in our family lives, in our organization throughout society. So thank you for the way in which you're promoting that in multiple different ways. Stephanie's got a question about trauma, which I think links back to what we were talking about earlier with challenging situations. But obviously there are many people dealing with trauma, trying to recover from some major event that's happened in their lives. And she's asked, are there daily routines that someone can do to establish more trust and safety when trying to overcome sort of the challenges of trauma?
Yeah, it's a really important question. As I indicated earlier, when we were talking about plasticity, plasticity happens wittingly or unwittingly, and trauma hijacks the mechanisms of plasticity, if you will, to encode suffering in the mind and the brain and the body. And so this is one of the ways that trauma exerts enduring effects, is through its changes in the brain. And in order to reverse the effects of trauma, we need to engage those same mechanisms of neuroplasticity for the good. And again, this is something that requires step-by-step practice. If you've been not doing physical exercise for a long time and you're totally out of shape, you can't expect to go to the gym for a couple of days and really be back in good shape immediately. It takes time, it's step by step. And in the same way, dealing with trauma, I think requires that as well. And it may even require much more intensive kind of intervention, depending on the magnitude of the trauma. This study that I was mentioning that was done in the country of Colombia with traumatized teenagers had a very intensive intervention where there was a summer camp that they attended for an intensive week, and they're basically getting the intervention every waking minute, which is really part of the design. And it may take that kind of intensive intervention to counteract the effects of trauma. Let me also mention one other thing about trauma. There's a lot of talk these days about the intergenerational transmission of trauma, and there's some hard-nosed scientific evidence on how that may occur in part through biological and specifically epigenetic mechanisms, which is quite interesting. The same is true on the positive side. I've been calling attention to the possibility of the intergenerational transmission of happiness, the intergenerational transmission of awakening through the very same mechanisms that are being used or being hijacked for the intergenerational transmission of trauma. And we're actually doing studies now in pregnant women where we're teaching them practices of well-being and looking at the outcome, not on the women themselves, but on their fetus, on the baby once the baby is born and the first few years of life.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, we always talk about how, as members of this community, we have a sort of ripple effect on those around us through our behaviors and intention. And but you're actually talking about a sort of generation to generation passing on of positive emotional attributes and mind states. I think that's incredible. It sort of links in the connected nature to a question here from one of my Action for Happiness colleagues, who says this pillar of connection seems particularly crucial. Do you, Professor Richard, feel there's a bigger disconnect between people right now because of the pandemic? And they've observed that they've noticed a change in friends becoming more insular and people perhaps connecting less frequently than they used to. It feels to me that there's an urgent need to reconnect, to re-galvanize some of that togetherness, actually. What can we do?
I totally agree, Mark. I think that's really important. And I think it's consistent with my observations. I think early on in the pandemic, our public health officials landed on an unfortunate phrase of social distancing. I wrote about this very early on in the pandemic. I think, what we're being asked to do is to physically distance, not to socially distance. It's possible to be physically distant and socially connected at the same time. But this has been a real challenge during the pandemic. And I think that these kind of simple appreciation practices where we bring our loved ones, as well as people we don't even know very well, into our mind and our heart and allow this sense of appreciation for positive things that they're doing, that can really be helpful. So that when we do have the opportunity to connect in person, it is a warm-hearted, fulfilling kind of connection.
Well said. Yes, and I'm on the subject of appreciation, which we've talked about a lot in this event. Is I have a huge appreciation for everyone who's in this community, either with us live on this event right now, or indeed in any other way in which they're helping to spread the message behind Action for Happiness that links so closely with your fantastic work. And particularly here we are at the start of a new year. Some of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with the action calendars that we share all year round. Here's Happier January, with a little tiny action each day that we can do, and indeed many, many thousands are sharing online, are sharing via our Action for Happiness app, which has 200,000 active users, and it's linking really so much of what you've talked about today, little kind acts, little things to be more self-aware, encouraging gratitude, encouraging connection, encouraging physical activity, a sense of meaning and purpose. So thank you to everyone who has come along here and made a donation to support Action for Happiness, which many have done to help make this work possible, and particularly for spreading those action ideas, spreading basically your core message, Richie, which I see as we can change through the small daily actions that we cultivate. It really, I find that so motivating. Is that a fair summary, would you say?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's something that I think is really accessible to all of us. And I love the fact that this community is part of this movement, and we're all on this journey together. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you everyone for being here, for all the great questions, for all that you've shared on the chat, for all the thanks I'm seeing here coming up for you right now, Richie. It's been an absolute pleasure being with you. Very grateful for all the wisdom you've shared, and we will send follow-up links to your work and the program and so on to everyone tomorrow. But before we leave, is there any sort of final summary or message you'd like to leave us with to sort of bring all this together?
Well, I think that the final message is this: we are clearly living in very challenging times, and the trajectory that humanity was on before the pandemic was not a particularly healthy or sustainable one, and it has become even more challenging with the pandemic. But the good news is that simple acts that we can engage in on a daily basis that really don't require a lot of time can change our minds and our brains in ways that will really change the world. And I think that the very future of humanity as we know it depends on this. And so please, all of you, join us on this journey. Encourage all the people that you know to participate, because our collective futures is hanging in balance.
Very well said, and what a lovely note to end on. Thank you so much for all of your time today, and also particularly the work you're doing, and keep up the great work. It really is making a massive difference.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you for all you're doing, and please keep up your work, which is super important.
Thanks, everyone. See you again soon.